Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha, and I like to talk about American history and history in general. Today is April the 21st, uh, 2026, and it's been a constant, constant nightmare, it appears, for the victimization of black women. It's been like a tsunami just unfolding as black women, are revealed to be victims of uh, intimate partner homicide. Of course, on uh, April 16, 2026, we all got news of the tragic murder of Dr. Serena Fairfax by her husband, the former lieutenant governor of uh, Virginia, Justin Fairfax. But on that day, apparently the body of an 8-month pregnant woman, Ashanti Allen, was discovered. She'd been murdered apparently her um, by her baby mama, her boyfriend, for whom she was pregnant. His name was Justin For. Sorry, his name was Kevin For. Kevin For, and he subsequently went on the run. Her body was discovered on April 16, 2026, and but yesterday he was arrested by U.S. Marshals in Louisiana after he had FaceTimed someone, exposing the corpse of his his girlfriend Ashanti Allen, whom he'd murdered apparently with a cord wrapped around her neck. So this is a lot of crazy stuff going on within the black community. Of course, they've just been, and it was just yesterday that we were getting more news, more details about uh, the arrest of the musician David after the body of a 14-year-old Celeste Rivers was found in his abandoned Tesla about 7 months ago. So there's been this deluge. And of course, just this weekend as well, there was the army veteran who murdered his own children, shot about eight kids, seven of them being his own kids, and of course he was killed in that exchange. Um, anyway, today what I wanted to discuss was, um, the possibility, the prospect of uh, emergency petitioning Justin Fairfax, if that could have precluded what happened. Of course, my intention is not to play Monday morning quarterback, right? But just going forward, because we are having these crises are issuing, one after the other. They keep unfolding, right? Intimate partner homicide. They keep April has been a terrible month. Maybe social media makes us more aware of this. Maybe it's something that's always been there. But particularly in the black community, black women have just really, they've been inundated with, uh, by being victimized through intimate partner homicide in this month of April 2026. So, something that I wanted to use the opportunity to talk about is an emergency evaluation petition. I've talked about how an emergency evaluation petition was used against me by a lunatic, a Howard University professor, Jide Wariri, right, who claimed he was my uncle. We didn't live together. I've done videos explaining that. Now, so that this is like a situation like Justin Fairfax's, or these people, killing their intimate partners. That's what an emergency evaluation petition is actually used for. That's the purpose of an emergency evaluation petition. An emergency evaluation petition, it's filed by in the state of Maryland. It's filed by someone called an interested party. So typically, that's someone's relative, their family member, or it could be a friend, a close friend, or a neighbor that knows them, not just anybody, right? Or a police officer or a pastor, right? So and that's an interested party. The requirements in Maryland, it's important that that person doesn't have, the person who petitions does not have a financial interest uh, in that person, right? They don't have a financial interest because it wants to prevent the possibility that someone is wrongfully committing an individual so that they can take over their assets, because this has happened in the past. It happens in America, right? So they don't have a financial interest in that person. But importantly, in the state of Maryland, for instance, an emergency petition is used on someone who is believed to have a mental illness. One, a mental illness, that's a requirement because you can't just take someone's right away, right? So they have a mental illness, believed to have a mental illness, and they are dangerous. They present an imminent threat to themselves or to others. So that means they are either suicidal or homicidal, right? And it's imminent. It's not something they're going to do a year from now, or it's imminent, something that's about to happen. And that's why they need the emergency to take away their rights and take them into custody, right? And um, those two conditions have to exist. And so in the state of Maryland, what happens is the petitioner, goes to a magistrate, goes to a judge, and then the judge has to see those two conditions. That okay, well, they have a mental illness, it has to be stated, and then they're going to narrate the what took place, the incident that occurred, what happened that made the petitioner concerned that this person is dangerous and they need to be evaluated at a hospital, because that's what's going to happen. It's a process to get them actually involuntary commitment so they can go and get treatment and to prevent a crisis, to prevent it's a public safety issue, right? It's a public safety mechanism. It's to prevent suicide or murder, right? And so the judge will make that determination in the writing, what they've written down, to see, okay, do those two conditions exist, and then find probable cause. It will say, okay, there's probable cause. This person has a mental illness. This person is dangerous. There's a public safety threat. So they should. So they're authorizing for law enforcement. So it's cops that typically do it, right? Cops would go and pick that person up from their home, right? Handcuff them, right? It's not an arrest warrant. That's the funny thing. It's not an arrest warrant because one, they still have to make that determination when they get there that if it's a false flag, if it's a false, if it's not true, the cops are not supposed to do anything, especially if they're in their home. It's not an arrest warrant. They can't go and pick the person up from their home, but if they see them in public, right? So if they see them in public, because that's the issue, it's a public safety issue threat. So they handcuff them, put them in an ambulance and take them to the hospital, right? And at hospital, the doctor, makes a determination. In Maryland, it lasts for 72 hours. It has a 72-hour time frame to be executed. So while at the hospital, a psychiatrist, an evaluator, so a forensic evaluator, right, makes a determination if they should be committed. And so it's the psychiatrist, psychologist, the qualified forensic evaluator who makes a determination. Are they fine, or do they need treatment? Right? They make that determination. Now that's for Maryland. The challenge about these things, let me just put it out there again, it has to be someone who has a mental illness. So if it turns out the person doesn't have a mental illness, the psychiatrist sees they don't have a mental illness, the challenge is that person who's been involuntary, they've been picked up, right? It's something that can destroy one's career. It's defaming because the person petitioning is saying they have a mental illness, right? And it becomes a public matter, right? So because they're being forced to go to a hospital, right? The person who did the petition is saying, hey, they're in a crisis. Some crisis has occurred. They demonstrated something very severe because America just doesn't go and start picking up people up and taking them to the hospital for an evaluation. It's against the law, right? But a judge authorizes it because there's a crisis, a major crisis is occurring. This person is about to kill themselves or kill someone. That's a major public safety matter. If it turns out that it's fraudulent, because a petitioner, first of all, has to take an oath, right, under penalty of perjury, right? So it has to be done in good faith. If it turns out that it's a false flag, I mean, it's false, the evaluee, the person who was forced to be evaluated can file a lawsuit, right? And then it can also bring criminal action against the petitioner because it can be deemed that they did it in bad faith. It wasn't done in good faith, right? It's only for people who have a mental illness and they're dangerous, right? So the downsides of being petitioned is one, it can destroy the career, right? It can destroy the career of the person who was evaluated, who was forced to be evaluated. And on the other hand, that person, right, just because of the damage to the reputation, the constitutional violations, if it turns out that it was a false flag, that person has a major lawsuit against the state, right? Against the state, of course, and against the petitioner, right? So that's, it brings severe civil suits and civil penalties. However, again, and this is like playing Monday morning quarterback. In the case of Justin Fairfax, did he meet those requirements? Absolutely, right? He committed murder, killed himself. We're seeing from court documents, right, that we're seeing from court documents, what's been released in the media, that apparently he had suffered some kind of crisis in 2022. He went missing in the park, and that there was a gun incident, right? And he went missing. Some news outlets claim that his family tried to talk to him. Even his brother may have hospitalized him. It's unclear. And in Virginia, you have to in Virginia. Virginia is one of those states again that if you actually say someone who doesn't have a mental illness has a mental illness, it's criminal. It can bring about a criminal charge, right? Apart from the person being able to file a lawsuit against you, right, for damages, right, for defamation. There are all sorts of indications in the media, though, that in their divorce proceedings, the judge indicated that one, he had an undefined, that's Justin Fairfax, had an undefined emotional and psychological issues, that he'd suffered both mentally, materially, substantially, following following an election, a failed election, and the sexual assault allegations that came up in 2019. And there are indications that he wasn't making any money, right? There were indications that he was described as a raging alcoholic, right? And things like that. So he was going through a mental health crisis, right? So he was prime candidate, right? A candidate to be emergency petitioned, right? The process in Virginia, what's the precedent? In Virginia, they have a similar uh, um, a similar alternative, right? A counterpart to what they have in Maryland. In Maryland, it's called an emergency evaluation petition. In Virginia, it's called emergency custody order, right? An emergency custody order. And it can be filed by somebody who's a responsible person. In Maryland, they call the person an interested party, right? An interested party, that's a family member or a friend. It can be a neighbor, right? It could be a police officer in the state of Maryland. In Virginia, it's called a responsible person. A responsible person can be a family member, it can be a pastor, it can be a police officer, it could be a very close friend, a neighbor, right? Those are people who can go to a magistrate. Magistrate is a judge. Go to a magistrate, file an emergency custody order. An emergency custody order has to be executed within 8 hours. And what the petitioner is doing, the petitioner is swearing on oath as well, swearing on oath that they witnessed, something, that makes this person dangerous, and they have a belief that the person has a mental illness, right? So again, the judge is trying to fight things, right? Items that demonstrate probable cause. So similar to Maryland, in Virginia, the person has to, you know, there has to be probable cause that the person has a mental illness, one, and that they present an imminent threat to themselves or to others, right? Or that they are incapable of taking care of their welfare, they're incapable of taking care of themselves. So those are huge bars to cross. Now, if that's the case, if the judge finds probable cause, right, the magistrate finds probable cause, then they authorize it, and that means a police officer, law enforcement can go and pick the person up, right? They'll be put in handcuffs, they'll be transported in a vehicle to a hospital, the nearest hospital. And then there's an evaluator on hand, right? An evaluator makes a quick evaluation to see if the person should be detained further, right? So they have 8 hours to execute. So the evaluator looks, to see if that person does, meet all the things that were the requirements for what's called a temporary detention order. Temporary detention order is 72 hours. For that, they have to be they're requesting that a judge approve for them to be withheld for 72 hours for treatment at the hospital for 72 hours, and that could be a path towards their eventually civil commitment, involuntary hospitalization for treatment. Now, so these things, however, have the potential of destroying people's careers, people's lives, because you're saying somebody has a severe mental illness that makes them a public safety uh, risk. And it's normally for people who are undergoing psychosis that they use these things for. So you can see why this may not have been used for Justin Fairfax if people were still concerned about his career, right? That they didn't want to destroy his career as a politician. He was just 47 years old. So if people, because, even though there's a mental health crisis in America, again, the stats show that 1 out of 3, right? 1 out of 3 Americans suffers substance abuse disorder or a mental illness. 1 out of 3. That's a lot. That's a lot, right? Over 86% Americans abuse alcohol or drugs, right? Americans, and those are things that can actually cause severe mental illness, right? They can, if they, with continuous, even the use of alcohol, continuous overconsumption of alcohol can lead to schizophrenia, can bring about schizophrenic symptoms. So Americans are dealing with a mental health crisis, but it's still stigmatized, right? And there's this scorched earth, you know, tactic, scorched earth method when it comes to politics in America. I once did a video explaining was in the 1964 elections between Barry Goldwater and President Lyndon B. Johnson. And all Lyndon B. Johnson's camp had to do was indicate that Barry Goldwater was probably nuts, right? And, that was it. President Johnson won the most massive landslide in American history, right? A presidential landslide in American history. So Americans don't, even though there's a mental health crisis in America, Americans still stigmatize mental health. There are a couple of politicians who are coming out today. So, any indications that somebody's unstable, might have a mental illness, destroys a person's political career. Even though with Gen Z, I don't know if things might change because there are indications that almost half of Gen Z have, struggled with mental illness or have spoken with a professional with regard to a mental illness, right? So uh, things might change in the future. I don't know. There are a couple of politicians today who are open about their mental illness, like Senator John Fetterman, right? He's managed it quite well, and I know Senator Angela Alsobrooks. She just became a senator from Maryland. She's a Black American woman, and she admits to, she's open about having ADHD, right? So she's made herself like an ADHD uh, advocate. But ADHD is kind of different. ADHD is almost seen like like a sexy ability thing, even though it's classified as a mental disorder. But they say about 45% of Silicon Valley execs have ADHD, right? So then lots of they say, in fact, it's entrepreneurs are 500% more likely. I don't know how they calculated that, but highly likely to have ADHD, right? Because many people who have ability, who are energetic and able to get things done, high performance, they say they have ADHD. So it's one of those those, I don't know. So, but things that have to do with psychosis that might impair one's judgment, that might cause forced hospitalization. Those are things that in America they historically destroy somebody's career, especially in politics. And Justin Fairfax, he clearly still had an interest in politics. Again, this is Monday morning quarterbacking, but it's something and it's very difficult. He was a lawyer, right? He was a lawyer. It would have been very difficult for anybody to have him committed if he didn't want to be committed, except his family, right? And he comes from a family of lawyers. His older brother was is actually incumbent. Is the dean of Howard University School of Law, and as I said, he used to be assistant dean in my law school. His sister-in-law was my law professor, so but the thing is, he being an attorney as well, it's something that he can easily get by. He can refuse. So it makes it very difficult. And if you're trying to force somebody to do what they don't want to do, especially with mental health, which is private in America, it falls within privacy laws. They can have you get a temporary restraining order against you. It's a form of harassment. It can become criminal because it's actually harassment. It can become criminal. It can, especially a lawyer knows how to handle these things. If they don't want to be if they don't want to be compelled. But that's where you have family that looks out for you. Now, with respect to mental health, it's if it's something treatment that one seeks voluntarily on their own. Of course, you can go to any medical doctor, any physician on your own, any psychiatrist on your own, and it's private. For psychiatrist wouldn't tell anybody, right? Otherwise, he'd be sued. He could lose his license. So it's something one has to do voluntarily and on their own. So ultimately, it was up to Justin Fairfax, not up to his family or friends, right? Because one, they faced the risk of a lawsuit, or even being themselves being defamed. That they're just trying to threaten and destroy his career. So what about his wife? By the way, his wife is not a physician. It's astonishing that I'm seeing media outlets calling her a physician. She was not a physician, she was a dentist. They're two different things. A dentist is not a physician, right? I think that's for me, it's irksome because when I tell people I'm not an attorney, but I'm a lawyer, they're two different things, right? I'm not an attorney, I'm a lawyer, right? But people keep, wanting to make assumptions on their own that, well, this is what this means, instead of going to simply look up a dictionary and finding out what does something mean, and to think that reporters are actually making that mistake with respect to the late Dr. Fairfax. So she was a dentist, right? Not a physician. So as a dentist, I don't think it's something she's qualified to do. Besides, she wasn't. She had a financial interest with him. She was in a dispute with him, so it wouldn't be something that she could, use herself. But people who know them, could have filed, could have petitioned. People who knew them could have petitioned, but she wouldn't have been able to petition themselves. And it's interesting that the judge in their case had indicated that he was struggling with mental health crisis. The judge could have ordered, but again, the judge could have probably ordered a petition, an emergency petition. Especially, I'm kind of concerned because he had a gun incident during his alleged apparent mental health crisis in 2022. So it was known he had guns. At that time, why wasn't he dispossessed of his guns, right? Why? So they probably made a determination that he didn't have a mental illness. There was, again, maybe he wasn't specifically diagnosed with a mental illness. And again, and maybe he doesn't have a mental illness, right? So maybe, they might go back again to his character, right? His character, and, just doing something that was sheer evil, and not that he had a mental illness, right? And it just had to do with his character that he chose to do something very evil, right? Um, so it's the other thing is, I think, lawyers abuse that whole process of emergency petitions. They can abuse it, right? They can use it for their friends to abuse the rights, constitutional rights of their adversaries, right? At the same time, they can undermine. So, without a doubt, if Justin Fairfax didn't want to be involuntarily hospitalized, right? He would have had friends who would have, and sycophants who would have easily undermined that process, still looking out for his political career, his prospects as a politician. Because again, it's unfortunate that somebody who is, forced to undergo that forced evaluation, forced hospitalization, their political career is normally destroyed in America. And so that's the whole idea. It's weaponized. It's weaponized. I've been a victim of that weaponization by Jide Wariri, right? Jide Wariri, of course, has been there's a ongoing. My family in Nigeria has filed a complaint against him. There's an intent for criminal complaint against him. Once this is over, for him to be extradited to Nigeria to face criminal prosecution, because in America he's meant to be facing criminal prosecution for a felony, right? He was engaged in a swatting, right? He made a false emergency crisis call. Everything he wrote was a fabrication. So there are people who weaponize, uh, there are people who do abuse and weaponize these emergency petitions. But as we're seeing, with the deluge of intimate partner homicide in America, there might be a need for them, but it's important that they're not abused. But unfortunately, as I was saying, people with influence, especially lawyers, are able to abuse the emergency petitioning. I've been a victim of it, as I said. Jide Warri's two of his kids are lawyers, and apparently he knew the judge who approved the wrongfully found probable cause when there was none on his fabricated and perjured petition. Her name's Judge BBM Berry. She graduated from Howard University, where he's been a teacher for 40 years. I learned from the police that they know each other very well. So it was abused, and so that's one of the challenges. If it's something that's weaponized, if an emergency petition that's supposed to protect the public is weaponized by people, by lawyers, then the purpose, its utility is defeated. In any event, let me stop this video here. I'll continue. And again, this is not me trying to play Monday morning quarterback, but just to point out the purpose of an emergency evaluation petition. Justin Fairfax would have been an appropriate candidate for that, but it would have been up to his friends and family to have petitioned again, and then a legal system that's not, a corrupt old boys network that undermines or circumvents the petitioning for their favorites, or those with choreographed careers like Justin Fairfax. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted.